Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Black Ops 2 In Depth. In today's episode, we're talking about awareness and dead silence. These are the two audio modifying perks in the game, mostly dealing with footsteps, so I decided to play a little bit of Search and Destroy. What you're seeing is me using a class with Ghost. I am also using Cold-Blooded, Awareness, and Dead Silence with a silenced MSMC. I'm about as stealthy as I can get. I'm very out of my element using all of the perks that I typically don't use, so you do get to see me struggle but overcome. And I'm trying to listen for footsteps. The game audio anyway is muted a little bit so you can hear my voice, but I'm trying to listen for people and hunt them down with sound. The awareness perk makes enemy noises louder. This is mostly footsteps, but all of the little bit of reloading where the gun clicks, the little callouts they make, the frag and bound, the take cover, the reloading, those sort of loud noises, those get louder, but it's mostly for footsteps. You don't hear the other ones as much. When they fall and they hit the ground and their knees crack, the knee cracking is louder, but again, it mostly just makes the footsteps louder. In previous Call of Duty games, this was usually a 4x increase or a 3 or 3.5x increase. This has recently had a slight buff, but it's still a minor increase. Dead silence makes your footsteps much more quiet. This effect is both for yourself and for the enemies. For yourself, you no longer hear your own footsteps stamping around on the map, clamping around, distracting you from listening for other footsteps. Your teammates won't hear your footsteps either because you can hear your teammates' footsteps a little bit, not as loud as the enemies. And the enemies, especially them, they cannot hear your footsteps. Again, in previous games, this was a 4x multiplier. They would get 4x more quiet, or 0.25 or 25% of the normal volume, however you want to look at it. However, in Black Ops 2, I'm almost tempted to say that they're completely muted. Even with my headphones on, even when I had awareness, I could not hear enemies that had dead silence. I tested this out. I had my headphones, had awareness, had the volume cranked up pretty high, and I had J-Hub run circles around me with dead silence, and I could not hear his footsteps. This may be my audio settings. This may be that I didn't turn my headphones up loud enough, maybe something else. If it didn't completely mute the footsteps, it made them much more quiet. Both of these perks are more effective if you're using some kind of headset. The headset really helps you here because the typical, stereo speakers or occasionally a mono speaker on a TV really compress the noise, and you especially don't hear that over the other people jabbering in your ear and the gunshots and that sort of thing. The best audio settings to get the most out of these perks, to hear the most footsteps and kind of get that extra radar, is if you put it in headphones mode or super crunch. I prefer headphones. It makes the footsteps slightly more audible. It makes them a little bit better than the normal Treyarch mix. Super crunch is probably the best setting, but what it kind of does, it just makes everything super mind-numbingly loud, and I have sensitive ears and loud noises bother me, and I just can't handle super crunch. It's just way too loud for me, so I prefer headphones. One of the things that I wanted to do in this episode was to get some numerical effects of the footsteps, but I had some problems. Number one is that there are too many different ways to test, too many different audio out. On a typical Xbox or PS3 or even on PC, you can do component audio out, you can do HDMI audio out, you can do DVI, you can do VGA and then the little audio cord. You can even do optical audio out. Then you have headphones, and my capture card only records a certain way, and there's so many different ways to analyze it, and I'm not an audio expert. I even tried to do a qualitative test instead of a quantitative test, but again, because of the way my capture card recorded the audio, you really couldn't hear the footsteps. I could hear them in the headphones a little bit, but you can't hardly hear them at all on my capture card, which leads me to the next problem. Footsteps are barely louder than ambient noise. Just the wind in the background, the trees, the train going by, they're just barely louder than that, and they are entirely muted by gunfire. If you're in the middle of a fight, if you're reloading, if anything is going on, you're not going to be able to hear the footsteps. This was probably a kind of a good step that they are realistically noised, or what their volume level has a realistic noise, because in previous Call of Duty games you could be firing a machine gun and then hear a guy walking up behind you, which in real life just absolutely wouldn't happen. But it's almost so much that you can't do it. It feels that you can't use it all. So I'm going to say that these perks can be only used in Search and Destroy and hardcore modes, where things are more quiet, where there's less noise, where there's less chaos going on. Any kind of fast-paced game mode, which is almost any core mode that's not Search and Destroy, maybe if you're the last guy left in headquarters or something, there's going to be too much gunfire, too much grenades, too much of everything else going on for you to be able to hear what's happening. Even with these perks, you're not going to be able to hear the footsteps that loud, because they are much less effective in Black Ops 2 than they were in previous Call of Duty games, and I think that they need a buff. I think that the footsteps need a buff. I have complained a lot about sound whoring in the past and how it was a problem, but in Black Ops 2, it's almost impossible to do unless you have headsets and you turn them up very loud, and then even still, it's complicated because of all the extraneous noise. So I think that the footsteps do need a slight buff, and that would make both of these particular perks more useful. Otherwise, keep these on search and destroy, and keep them in hardcore search and destroy hardcore modes, but don't bother with them in core or anything else. Well guys, that's all for this episode of In Depth. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful. If you'd like to check out my previous episode on Flank to Win, you can click that box on the left. It'll open in a new window. My next episode is on flashbangs versus concussions. That'll be a fun one. And as always, if you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Oh yes, I have an app. The class building app is also down there in the description. Drifter out.